Hi, everybody. How you doing? There we go. Okay. I'm going to give this just another minute or two, and then we'll get this thing fired up. Looks like we got a little bit of a different group this week. I see some names here that look like it might be your first time. So welcome if you're new to the live session. If you can, for those of you who haven't been here before, if you can turn on your cameras, I'd love to see your shiny, happy faces. If it causes you some streaming issues, though, or some computer failure, then don't do it. But if you can turn on your cameras, I would appreciate it. About another minute, I guess, and we'll get this thing going. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, good. Very good. See, when you nod your head, I can see you. All right. So it looks like we got, what? We got 14 folks plus me. That's not too bad. Okay. So today, I want to talk to you about cinema lenses. Okay. You guys are going to have an opportunity, if you elect to go to the campus this week, to check out some cameras with the operational office there, the equipment room. I've put some instructions on the assignment on how to do that, and you should have received an email from Devin in the operational office with instructions on how to check out the Lumix FC1000. So this is the base model cinema camera that we have for you guys. Now, we have 30 of these at UCF. Okay, that sounds like a lot, but I want to point out that in this class alone, I have 30, over 30 people, and I have 30 more people in my section 3 class. There's a section 2 class. It's a smaller number of folks, and I don't know if they have an assignment this week that would require a camera or not. But I have at least now well over 60 students that might be competing for 30 assets at the rental office. So I'm going to give you guys 2 weeks to do the assignment. But I would recommend, getting in and checking out a camera sooner than later, so you don't get locked out, in terms of being able to get your hands on one. It's a simple assignment, so we'll go over it at the end of the presentation if there's time. But I wanted you to initiate your relationship with the operations office, because they're going to be the ones you're going to go to in the future to check out equipment. Excuse me. So I wanted you to have that sort of break that ice with those folks. And I wanted to give you an opportunity to at least get your hands on something other than a cell phone to do your assignment with. Now, if you already have your own DSLR or cinema camera or whatever, and you want to use that, you're welcome to do that as well for the assignment, okay? I just didn't want you to be relegated to only having a cell phone option. So, do what works best for your schedule and your accessibility, okay? Let me go ahead and share my screen. Can we use our own camera if we have one? Yes. Yes, you can. Absolutely. What have you got, by the way? Who is that? Colin? What kind of gear are you pushing, Colin?
Actually, I just got the pocket cinema camera, the Blackmagic 4K.
Oh,
I've been
great.
saving up for a while, but yeah.
So you have this one.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, yes, very good. That'll be a fun camera for you to play with.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
You might want to read the instructions and get to know it before you try to do your assignment, though, just in case.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So that's terrific. That's really great. I'm glad to hear it. Okay, where was I? Sharing my screen. Let's do that. Let me get my presentation going here. Sorry for the dry cough there, folks. I have medication that makes me cough every once in a while. I'll just have to do a little product placement every once in a while. Coca-Cola and Werther's Originals. Okay, so here we are. This is, what is this? This is week 6 for us, I guess. So we're just about halfway through this, this semester. I want to take a quick look at the modules just to see where we're at as far as that goes. So, oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yeah, survey of cameras. That was week 5. Here we are, lens work, week 6. So this is good. So I want to talk to you today about lenses, cinema lenses, photographic lenses, what the obvious differences are, and then give you some stuff to think about today in terms of how you might apply this information, this knowledge moving forward. So what do we want to talk about here? Let's go to my presentation. Let me pull that up here. Can you guys see this okay? This whole deal? Okay. That title card is wrong. Sorry about that. We are going to talk about glass today. That's the industry speak, man. That's the lingo. Okay. So when we're talking about cinema lenses, the cool kids all say glass. So we're going to talk about glass today. I'm talking about structure and function. Talk a little bit about photo versus video or cinema glass. Talk about a little bit about attachment. And I'll show you how to fix lenses to the Ursa Mini. And I've got a number of other platforms here we can take a look at. We'll talk a little bit about the difference between f-stops and t-stops, which is something that comes up fairly frequently. And I just want to show you some stuff. The thing about this particular class that's kind of a bummer in the age of COVID is this is one of my favorite classes because I bring dozens of lenses into this live session when I do it, you know, in 148. And I love passing the lenses out and letting everybody just kind of handle them and look at them and see what they are and, you know, feel how heavy they are, you know, feel how well they're made and all of that. And unfortunately, we can't do that. So today you'll have to live vicariously through what I show you on the screen. But I would preface this conversation to say that if you do elect to go and check out the FC100 this week or next week, while you're there, ask the folks at the equipment room if you can see some of this stuff. I think as long as they're not busy, they'd be happy to show you some stuff. As you know, if it's not leaving the room, if all they've got to do is open up a case and let you take a look at it, I think they'd be happy to do that. And you can at least get a sense of the scale and this, you know, of these things and, you know, what they feel like in your hand and so forth. And this will be the, you know, sort of the beginning or your initiation into this, this world of cameras and lenses and stuff and equipment like this. So if you stop by there, ask them to take a look at some of this stuff. This title card here are the Zine Cinema Primes. I've got a set of them here, but I've only got one to show you up close. This is the Zine 50 millimeter. Because I'm kind of cramped for space here on my my editing console. This is what I would normally do here would be all my editing and post-production work, but right now it's jam-packed full of lenses and cameras. So this is really, I'm running out of space, but these are the the Zine Cinema series made by Rokinon. And you guys have several sets of these at school. This is the partnership parent company with Zine, and that's Rokinon. Rokinon is the U.S. Subsidiary of I believe it's Samyang that makes the lenses in Asia, in South Korea. In fact, I've got a 35 millimeter right here. Let's see, it says made in Korea. Yeah, it doesn't, this is a Rokinon, so it's not going to tell me, but I'm pretty sure it's Samyang. And so you will see these lenses that I have on the screen now featured as Rokinon, Samyang, Bauer, Vivitar, I think that covers the range of OEM names for these lenses. They're all quite good. I like them. I've got the full set of Rokinons from 8mm to 135. I've had them for about, I don't know, 5 years now, I guess. I've tested them and compared them against lenses like Canon L series and Zeiss legacy glass, and I find them to be very competitive in terms of sharpness and contrast, but they're inexpensive. So they're very accessible at this point. If you're a student, you want to buy a couple of these for your own use or whatever, they're not terribly expensive. And because of that price point, the school was able to purchase a number of sets of these as well for you folks to check out when you get to the point where you're doing your class projects. So let's start talking about the difference. Why would you want a cinema lens versus, say, a photographic lens? Okay. And the difference stems from the intended usage. Okay. So still lenses, as opposed to cinema lenses, serve a unique single end user purpose. Okay. They're meant to be held a certain way, operated a certain way. And cinema lenses just don't share those same expectations in terms of application and footprint. Okay, you can see this this camera assistant here, or this operator. I'm not sure what position she's fulfilling here, but she's got an Ursa Mini, kind of like ours, and she's got it, set up with a follow focus and an EVF, and she's got a 14mm that looks like it might be a Sigma Cinema Prime. And she's got their external monitor and everything. Whereas this guy is just sort of romping around taking photographs. Okay. So there's a difference in the way that we're intending to use these pieces of gear. So this is a single operator situation. And if she's the operator of this Ursa Mini, she's clearly going to have some help here, probably a focus puller and maybe also a second assistant camera person. Okay. So she might be on a feature film, whereas this guy might be shooting, sports for the local newspaper, or could be a war correspondent over in the Middle East. It's almost endless what the possibilities are that this guy might be up to as a still photographer. So the two worlds are very, very different. So we want to take a look at the different lenses and sort of figure out why we would want one over the other, and possibly do they cross over, which they do. Still lenses are designed for the photographer who has the ability to pause between frames. So if you're a still photographer, you're taking an image at a time. You're taking time in between to consider your composition, consider your subject matter, maybe readjust the exposure on your camera in terms of the manual controls. It's a different process. Okay. Cinema lenses don't have the luxury of that kind of time. Most of the time we're shooting takes, parts of scenes, which are going into a larger composition with a different kind of end user, and we're doing it 24 frames at a time, at 24 frames a second. Okay, so it's a different kind of situation. Cinema lenses need to perform while the camera is operating and grinding. We used to call it grinding corn. While the camera is turning and pushing 24 frames a second through the gate, the cinema lens has to be functioning, and it has to be adjustable during the duration of shooting, as opposed to a still lens, which you adjust, take a picture, and then readjust. Okay. So I have, for instance, an Olympus film camera. I think I pulled this out a couple of weeks ago. Okay. So in the days of film, where you had just a device like this and you're taking a shot at a time, advancing the film a shot at a time, a shot at a time. And this is a pretty small device. So actually, this is one of my cameras I used to shoot with professionally a long time ago. I chose it for its size, its compactness, and the idea that I might have 2 or 3 of these hanging around my neck on a day of shooting. For instance, I shot the LPGA a number of times. And so when you go out onto the golf course and you're going to be there for 4 or 5 hours before you go to lunch, I'd take 3 bodies, and I'd have 3 different focal lengths on each camera, or I might have black and white film in one camera and color film in another camera. And I'd have a couple of different things. So all I had to do was drop one and pick the other one up and shoot what I wanted to shoot, whatever I saw in front of me that inspired me. Okay. But the idea was, this was the mode of operation, right? Focus, shoot, look for another moment, compose, focus, and shoot, okay? That was still photography. Over the years, the cameras got more complex. In 97, I went full digital with Canon. And I bought their first digital platform, and then I grew out of that and I invested in 60Ds around 2011. And that was a little bit of a different camera. Now it was autofocus, completely automated body with manual overrides, digital instead of film, okay? And had a totally different ergonomic, right? So let's take a look and show you these two, okay? Totally different ergonomics, okay? The digital camera, you know, has a nice series of lenses. The Canon lenses, in this case, this is a Tokina photographic lens. It's a macro lens, okay, but really nice lenses, very good quality. You know, if you were shooting, you know, a magazine cover or, you know, feature images for an article or whatever, this equipment was totally sufficient for that end, okay? So that was the still approach to the problem. And then we start getting into movies and motion pictures, and we want to start using things like Ursa Minis, okay? And we're going to start working with camera assistants, and people are going to be helping us. In the still realm, I was looking through the optical viewfinder and focusing the lens myself, or as the cameras got more sophisticated, the camera would autofocus for me, right? But I'm still operating the camera with my eye to the eyepiece and doing everything myself. Then we move into the cinematic realm, and I've got, now we're working with a second AC, a first AC, a camera operator, and a director of photography. We got 4 people now that can manage the situation. And it's a different kind of what we call footprint around the camera, right? Different operating approach to the gear. So if we were to take a look at the difference between cinema and stills lenses, for instance, here's a Samyang Rokinon 35 millimeter lens, and it's designed to be operated by a photographer, okay? And you can tell because it's got the rubber sort of tactile grip around the focus ring, as opposed to its brother, the cinema lens, which has the gears, okay? And we talked a little bit about this last week. The gears help facilitate the use of our follow focus device, okay, which we'll talk about again in a minute. So a little bit different application in terms of the lens construction, okay, between these two from the same manufacturer, one intended to be used for still work and the other intended to be used for cinema work. And that just happens to be the Rokinon comparison. So I have here, when I bought my digital lenses for my still cameras, Rokinon wasn't out yet. But what one of the companies that was out was Sigma, and Sigma's been out for a very long time, and their lens products are exceptional. So I purchased the Sigma autofocusing lens in EF mount for my Canon cameras. And when I went to the Rokinon series, the Rokinon is a whole different deal, right? So you can see how these two lenses really have different intents. This one's also a heck of a lot bigger. And the funny thing of it is they both have basically the equivalent f-stop, okay? But there's some reasons why the cinema lenses are physically larger than the photographic lenses, and I want to get to that next, okay? Okay, so cinema lenses are purpose-built, okay? They're intended to be focused by an operator separate from the camera operator, so a different individual working with it. Because it's a manual focus device, that's typically the primary reason why cinema lenses are so much bigger than photographic lenses. If I take this 50 millimeter Zine lens, okay, and I compare it to, let's say, let's look at, here's a 50 millimeter in the Olympus manual focus series off the camera that I just showed you. Okay. Now, the 50 millimeter Olympus lens, it's pretty easy to focus and it happens very quickly, right? If I'm looking through the viewfinder of a still photographic camera and I want to bring the image into focus, I want it to come into focus very quickly so that I can catch the moment that I see happening in the viewfinder. Okay, there's a priority there. Focus has to happen as quickly as I can possibly make it happen so that I can verify my composition and snap that shutter and isolate that moment in time. Okay. Now, sometimes you can facilitate that by pre-focusing your lens, okay, to a given distance. Like if I was shooting a basketball game and I was on the sidelines and I was sort of focused in on the net, if I was waiting for, you know, the center forward to come up and do a layup, right, I would focus on the rim from my position, and then I could just concentrate on composition at the moment of the layup, right? Make sure I get the player in the frame the way I want it, wait for that moment where they reach the top of their jam, and then wait for the stuff and snap the frame. And if you have a motor drive, you could get a series of frames if you were lucky. And then you have sort of a sequential action that takes place. But the priority was wing, snap that thing into focus really quick. If you're photographing random subject matter, like if you're running around the battlefield, for instance, in Iraq, and you're trying to take photographs of the insurgency as it's happening, right? You don't have the benefit of pre-focusing anything, and you're running around from vantage point to vantage point, and you need this lens to achieve focus very quickly, and you're verifying through the viewfinder when you get it, and snap, bang, you take that photograph. Focus for cinema doesn't work that way. It's a different kind of institution. We want focus to happen purposefully, and sometimes we want it to happen gradually, because the suggestion of an image that gradually comes into resolution or comes into focus has a psychological assumption or subtext attached to that action of slowly coming into focus. We call that resolving, slowly coming into focus, slowly resolving the image. Okay. So that becomes part of the dramatic fabric of what we're doing in terms of cinema. It's not the thrash bang manual quick focus of photojournalism, and it's the purposeful dramatic progression of resolution with our lenses. So with a cinema lens, here's my Zine again. Okay, you can see the barrel on this thing is huge, but look at the optic in the middle. So I can catch some of my key light on there. So here's the Olympus 51.4, and here's the Zine 50 T1.5. Notice the front objective, the front lens is called the objective. Notice the objectives are the same size. 50 millimeters is 50 millimeters, whether it's a photographic lens or a cinematic lens. It has to do with the arrangement of glass inside the lens and the way the elements bend and twist the light rays and create a projection out the back that covers an image field that is 50 millimeters wide. So the objectives themselves are the same size because they're 50 millimeter, right? And they're both the same effective stop in terms of the diaphragm. This is f1.4, this is T1.5, and I'm going to talk to you about the differences there in a little while. Okay. Equivalent light gathering ability and equivalent focal length means the elements are the same size. Okay. Now, I've heard people say that Rokinon lenses are nothing more than still lenses that have been rehoused. Okay. That is a fallacy. That is not true. This lens was built to be a cinema lens from the ground up, but the elements that equal 35 millimeters at T1.5 might be similar. That might even be the same optics that they would put in their 35 millimeter still lens. Okay. But there's something different about the cinema lens from even the still lens in this series of lenses. And that is the rate of rotation of a cinema lens. Now, because this lens barrel is so big on the Zine lens, When I turn it, if you can see the witness marks on here, when I turn it, it's a very gradual transition from so many feet to so many feet. Like, look how many witness marks there are from the minimum focusing distance, which is, it's going to be under a foot. It's like, what is it? Oh, I guess it's 1.6 feet is the minimum focus. Okay. All the way out to infinity, which happens somewhere beyond 60 feet. Look at how many marks there are in there, and look how long the turn is that happens at all of these little marks. Okay, the difference between 2 feet and 3 feet, the difference between 3 feet and 4 feet, 4 feet and 8 feet, or 6 feet and 8 feet, 7 feet and 9 feet, 9 feet and 15 feet, 15 and 20, 20 and 30, 30 and 40, 40 and 50, 50 and 60, and then infinity. Okay, why do you suppose that is? Especially down here in the zone that I like to call the sweet spot, which is between, say, 4 feet or 3.5 feet. Here's 3.5 feet and 10 feet. What do you suppose is happening there? And look how much turn there is between those two different settings. It's quite a lot of movement on the lens. Why do you suppose that is? When we're on set and we have the camera out and we're photographing, let's say we're photographing an actor talking to another actor, Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy sitting at a table in, after the sunset, okay, or before sunrise, or whatever those movies are, right? Very, very good looking films. They're talking at the table, right? The camera might be tracking a little bit back and forth to get a little dramatic motion in the frame, right? And, they're sitting there and they're talking. So they might shift in their chair, drinking a cup of coffee, asking the waiter for something, saying hello to somebody across the room, right? Talking to each other, leaning in for serious emphasis, leaning out for, acknowledgement or levity or whatever. There's a range of motion in here, maybe 18 inches, 24 inches, right? So, and how far away are they from the camera? The sweet spot in films with a 50 millimeter lens usually has the actors about 6 to 8 feet from the camera, because with this lens at 6 to 8 feet, we get a very nice kind of sort of medium close-up shot, especially of two people sitting at a table having coffee. You don't want to stick in that wide shot for very long because it's boring, right? You don't want to be too close because then, you've got, talking heads that are kind of big in the screen, especially if it's going to be a movie, right? You project that 60 feet wide and it's like, whoa, that's a little too close. So it's a nice, comfortable, loose close-up, we call it, at about 6 feet with a 50 millimeter lens. Okay. But if I'm moving in and out a little bit, I need to have some control. So the focus puller needs to have markings in between, say, 6 feet. Maybe if I push into a little under 5 feet and I move as far as 7 feet, I'm going to be able to see those markings on the lens if I'm following the focus, so that I can change that as the actor's moving and shifting in their position, right? I've got all that space that I can adjust the lens. And if something happens in between, if there's a point of focus that happens in between the established marks on the barrel, I might take my, what are these? These are the old Faber Classics, the China markers. And I might say, okay, this actor is actually leaning in for emphasis at exactly 5 feet. Well, I've got 4.9 on the barrel and I've got 5.5 feet. So at 5 feet, I'll put a little mark on the barrel with my white China marker. And I can see that. So when I'm pulling focus and that character leans in for emphasis, bang, right on my mark, right? Right on my mark. And then they move back out and they reset at 4 feet or whatever. Okay, I've got enough room in there to make my own marks on the barrel if I need to. And I also have enough incremental sort of delineation between the focusing distances. If that actor is moving around, I can anticipate where on the barrel this lens needs to be focused so the operator can do nothing but concentrate on composition. That's focus pulling kind of in a nutshell. Yeah, Colin.
Why does the focus seem to change like kind of in random increments? Like how come some is like 3.9 and then some is like 5 exactly, and then like is there reasoning for that, or is it just kind of random?
In the case of this lens, you can see that each one of these, we call them witness marks.
Yeah.
They're in groups like 4'3" to 3 feet, well, to 3'9". Those 5 marks right there, they're all about 1/4 of an inch apart on the lens.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So in order to have equal spacing, so I can fit the text on the barrel, this is laser etched, and I can have equal spacing between them, and I can have a variety of marks. That happened to be where the lens needed to be set. Inside, when you turn that focus ring inside this lens, okay, the elements in the groups are moving in and out. There's, sometimes very minutely and sometimes greatly, depending on whether you go from minimum to maximum focus or not. The elements are moving inside, okay, on a track or on a helicoil. Okay, so wherever the coil stops and it's in focus, if I can get equal spacing, whatever that distance is what we put on the barrel. Okay, that's the primary reason for that. Okay. It's all about facilitating manual focus by an assistant who's not looking through the viewfinder. That is what this lens is all about. That's why this lens for the cinema camera is as wide in the front as it is, because it's like gears on your bicycle, right? If you go on the big gear, right, you have a different sort of amount of pressure you have to exert on the pedals, and you have a rate of speed. But if you go to a smaller gear, okay, change gears to a smaller gear, your rate of speed changes and the amount of force also on the pedals changes, right? Well, a still lens, this one's an autofocus lens for Canon, and a cinema lens, okay? On the autofocus lens, I don't need to have a big barrel with a really broad focus throw on it, we call it, okay? Because the camera's doing the focusing for me through this lens. This is an autofocus lens. Okay, so if the camera's doing it, then the camera's using internal motors in here and stuff, which can help make this lens smaller, but there's no real access to it. I've got a limited slip manual focus ring that declutches when I'm in autofocus on the Canon camera, or I can activate the clutch and focus the lens manually, but I have no tactile frame of reference with this lens that I have with the cinema lens. I know exactly where minimum is, because when I reach that point, it stops and is what we call a hard stop. And when I go all the way out to infinity, the barrel stops turning again. And when I hit infinity, and I hit another hard stop. The Canon lenses don't have that. They just keep spinning and spinning in there when the clutch is released, because the camera is doing all that for us using a phase contrast detection system, which is looking at the actual image as it resolves on the pickup device, on the chip, and gauging focus through contrast. It's not gauging focus through physical distance and measuring and resolving in a different way like the cinema lens is doing. Okay, so it's two different, totally different schools of thought when we're talking about these two different series of lenses. Okay, let me get back to the program here and see what other slides I have for you. Okay, so the point is focusing and achieving critical focus is the priority. And with a cinema lens, you have a far greater control. Okay. Focusing with cinema lenses, focus throw and breathing. Okay, so I told you that focus throw is the amount of rotation that we have from minimum to maximum and from 2 points in between. That's a focus throw, right? And as we see that image in the viewfinder, or when we see the image projected on a TV screen or a cinema screen, if we have the image focused on something in the foreground, and then we throw the focus to something in the background, the foreground object may become out of focus in lieu of the background object, which then becomes in focus. And when we throw it back to the foreground, you could bring me back into focus, for instance, and the camera might go out of focus. That'll happen on a cinema lens. We call that a focus throw as well. Okay, and that's a dramatic mechanism that we use in motion pictures to emphasize a moment, to emphasize a line of dialogue, to emphasize a facial performance, or in a POV to throw the focus from our character in the foreground as they turn and look at something in the background, and we throw the focus to what they see. Okay, so it's a point of view advantage as well. There's lots of reasons why we might want to throw the focus with a cinema lens, and we need the control to be able to do it. The focus throw on this little 50 millimeter from Olympus is very short. Okay, the rate of rotation of this 50 millimeter lens from minimum to maximum is maybe a half a turn on the barrel, okay, which is not very much at all. Okay, maybe 50, 150, 180 degrees. The rate of rotation on the Zine lens from minimum to maximum is quite a long way. So it's going to be almost a full turn, which is almost 360 degrees. This has about a 330 degree barrel rotation on it, okay, which is a very long way. That means there's going to be more room in between for precision focus. Okay, part of that is facilitated by the diameter of the barrel. It's a larger gear, so it has longer time to turn. Okay, that's all it is. It's a construction aspect of that lens. But I mean, this lens is made out of spun aluminum. It's laser etched. It's done out of, in many cases, a solid chunk of aluminum. So it has to be, this distance right here is 114 millimeters, okay? Plus whatever the extra distance is for the gears on this part that turns. So they might be working from a solid block of aluminum, and they mill out the parts and assemble this lens from several solid blocks of aluminum. There's a lot more material in this cinema lens than there is in this still lens. And that's going to account for a vast difference in price as well. Okay. There's also far fewer of these Zine 50 millimeters made in a year by Rokinon than there are 50 millimeter lenses, let's say, made by Canon for their autofocus cameras, the nifty 50-1/8s, for instance, that everybody gets as a kit lens when you buy a Canon camera body, right? They probably make a couple million, 2, 3, 4 million of those lenses a year, right? Because they're selling a ton of them. They might make 250,000 of these in a year, maybe less than that. Okay, which makes this a priority manufacturing process, which is smaller batches in smaller numbers and fewer batches, right? Which drives the price up. Okay, you can make 3 million of these at a wholesale price point because you're working in volume. If you make 50,000 of these, the manufacturer has to retool, stop what they're doing, okay, and make a small run batch on stuff like this. And that's part of the reason why the cinema lenses cost what they do, okay. That's also one of the reasons, incidentally, why red cameras cost what they do as opposed to Panasonic GH5s. Okay, Panasonic probably makes bunch loads of these in a year, a couple 100,000 of them maybe. And how many does Red make? I don't know, maybe a few thousand, right? That's a custom run at a manufacturing plant, and it's going to drive up the cost of production on those cameras. And lenses work the same way. Okay, back to the program. All right. So pulling focus, I'm talking about pulling focus now. So I removed the apparatus from the Ursa Mini. I can put it back together. I wanted to show you, I wanted you to be able to see the lens effectively without all the stuff in the way, like the viewfinder and things like that. But what I might do is pop the follow focus back on so you can see that working again. Pulling focus. Okay, the focus throw is quite long in cinema applications, allowing the focus puller to have more room to find the precise focal distance. The first AC is the one doing this, by the way, and that's their primary job. Okay. I showed you this before. This is the focus assist, or the follow focus wheel, follow focus handle, whatever you want to call it. In area, they call it the FF4. Zacuto has one. This is a Photocy, which is Fotka. There's bunches of them out there. Lots of different manufacturers making this kind of equipment. Okay, so let me pop this back on the camera here. If I put it on this side, can we see it? Not really. I'm going to do it though. I'm going to put it on the back side so we can see the lens elements. Okay. Okay, there we go. All right. So the person pulling focus needs to be able to see the difference on the lens between 3 feet and 5 feet. If your folks are 3 feet and 5 feet away, okay, standing on set talking, and let's say we are shooting them, maybe it's a James Bond film, right? Bond is in the foreground with a pair of binoculars looking at what the bad guys are doing, right? We get a POV through the binoculars, and then we get Bond's close up looking through the binos, and then he pulls them down and he looks at what's going on, and then he puts them back up. He's in the binos, and then standing behind him might be Felix from the American CIA, right? And Felix is telling him, okay, at such and such a time, these guys are going to come through with the truck full of explosive devices, and that's those are the guys we need to capture. So we got Bond in the foreground, and we got Felix in the background. And when Bond is looking through the binos, we get his POV, then we get his close up, and he might say, so what exactly am I looking for? And at that moment, we're going to throw the focus from Bond in the foreground to Felix over his shoulder in the background. Felix is at 5 feet, Bond is at 3 feet. That's quite a bit of distance in focal plane, okay? Which meant that Felix was probably at least slightly out of focus, if not grossly out of focus, depending on what aperture we were shooting at, okay? Bond is in the foreground and he is focused or resolved. Felix is in the background, out of focus. When we go to Felix's line, we throw the focus from 3 feet on Bond to 5 feet on Felix. You need to be able to see the difference between 3 and 5 feet. And on a lens like this, you can. So here's 3 feet. And 5 feet is way up here. Okay. That's quite a bit of a turn on the focus wheel. That's from here to here. And I've basically reverted my finger and my thumb from there to there on the focus wheel. It's almost a full half turn on the focus wheel. Okay. That's a lot when you're talking about doing this by feel, by hand, right? So if I can feel the sense and get a sense of the difference between 3 and 5 feet on the wheel, and I can see the difference between 3 and 5 feet on my lens, it makes my job as a focus puller very, very easy. Now, conversely, on that 50 millimeter lens, let's say I wanted to use a legacy piece like the Contax, the Zeiss Contax 50 millimeter 1.4. Okay, here's a Zeiss Contax 50 millimeter 1.4. Okay, it's a very nice lens. It's very sharp and has very pleasing contrast. It's a little bit bigger than the Olympus 50 millimeter. It's a tiny bit smaller than the Canon autofocus, but it is notably smaller than the Zine. Okay, I don't know if you can see that. Okay, it's pretty small. Now, the difference on this lens between 3 and 5 feet is this much. Did I go the right way? Nope, I went the wrong way. Here's 5 feet. There's 3 feet. 5 feet, 3 feet. It's this much turn between my fingers. I went from this on the cinema lens with all of that feel that I can anticipate, oof, and throw, Bond, Felix, Bond, Felix. And you can see that transition on the screen, and it's very pleasing. On this lens, I'd have a heck of a time with my timing between those two spots, and they're very close together on the lens. This isn't too bad because the Zeiss lenses are exceptional optical devices, okay? But like the Olympus lens, let's see how much throw there is on the Olympus lens. Okay, the Olympus lens is that much. That's even less than the Zeiss. Still photographic lenses, the witness marks are really, really close together. There's fewer of them. And this, even if I modified it to fit on the cinema camera, this lens would be a nightmare to try and follow focus with on a feature film. It would really, really test my patience and test my skill level. Because with that minute difference right there in adjustment, that's very hard to nail when you're talking about actors that are maybe moving within the frame, shifting a little bit. God forbid, Felix leans into 4.5 feet from 5 feet and puts emphasis on the bomb is in the truck, right? Now I got to figure out on this little tiny focus scale, the difference between 5 and 4.5 feet. It might be that, right? There's not a focus puller in the world that's going to be able to nail that enough times for their performance to coincide with the best performances of the actor, because that's the other consideration that we're dealing with here, right? The actors are doing their thing. Sometimes the actors blow their line and they got to do it again, right? And that's bad enough. But if you're dealing with somebody who likes to give you one line and then they want to leave and go to their trailer, like Jack Nicholson, you blow the focus on Jack and you're going to hear it. You're going to hear it from him probably right there, right away. You're going to get it from the DP later or the director or both. You might get fired if it happens enough times, okay? Because if Jack blows his line, it's no big deal. If you destroy Jack's best performance of the day because you blew the focus, you're probably going to get fired, okay? That's the world that the focus puller lives in at the highest levels of production, right? When you're dealing with some of these egos and they feel like, you know, they come to the set and they're ready to go. They've done their homework. They want to deliver their lines. They've got their performance all figured out and they're all up for the moment, right? And then they give you this amazing performance in front of the camera and you buzzed them. You blew the focus. That's it. You're done. Okay. And that happens a lot, which is why if in Hollywood you're a good focus puller, you'll probably always be a focus puller because not everybody's good at it. And when you find a good one, you want to keep that person as long as you possibly can and pay them whatever they want because they're worth it. Because autofocus can't perform, even now with the best cameras that we have, with the autofocus systems that we have, autofocus cannot perform the way a manually focused cinema camera can, because the autofocus system doesn't know where the dramatic moments are. Where's the dramatic pause? How long should the focus throw be, right? The duration, in other words. At what moment do you want to throw that focus from foreground to background? Automatic systems don't have the answers to any of those questions. So that's why we don't use them in a cinematic context, because we as filmmakers are exercising nth degree of control over everything. So when I want to follow focus, when I want to throw the focus from foreground to background, and how long I want that transition to be might be specific instructions by the director, okay? There might be really good reason for it, okay? However, we can adapt these devices in the interest of economics, for instance. Let's say, like Colin, you got the Blackmagic Pocket 4K, right? You're gonna shoot movies with that? You're gonna shoot, what are you gonna shoot with that?
Try to shoot more like short film stuff like that. I mean, sometimes a little bit more just small stuff with my friends,
But still cinematic, right?
yeah,
More or
yeah.
less. Okay, but while you're dinking and dunking around uh, in film school and you're experimenting and you're trying things, you know, maybe the school you know, the school's got just so much gear and everybody wants to borrow it to shoot their projects with. One weekend, you're out of luck. All the cinema lenses have been checked out, but they offer you, in this picture here, I think it's a Canon 35-105 L series zoom lens. You can adapt it to the Ursa Mini, let's say, or you could adapt it to the pocket cinema camera, or you could certainly use them on the Canon 60Ds because the flanges are native for Canon. A lot of times you can make these tools fit and mix and match them with the platform that you're using. So let's say all the cinema lenses are gone, but you can get your hands on an Ursa Mini. Okay, so we're going to adapt the lens in some way. So we're going to get the focus gears that we were talking about the other day, the hard plastic gears. We might, let's say we got our Zeiss 50mm lenses and we want to use the legacy Zeiss stuff on the Ursa Mini. Well, we can do it. On this lens, the native flange is for Yashica contacts, which is what the camera bodies were that were using these lenses. But with this little flange adapter right here, I changed this lens flange from Yashica contacts to Canon EF. Now, the lens won't autofocus because it's not an autofocus lens. So Canon EF is the designation for the flange itself, because the Canon manual focus flanges of the 80s and 90s are different from the Canon autofocus flanges of the 2000s. Okay, there's a difference in the diameter of the flange, and there's a difference in the flange focal distance the lenses are seated at on the camera. So this is just Canon EF designates which size and style of flange it is. And I can mount this flange adapter to the back of the contacts lens and essentially make it compatible with Canon EF. And then I can take it over here. I can take my my Zine lens off, and I can put my contacts lens on in its place. Oop. Now it's on there. Okay. It looks a little silly, you know, being this small little lens on this giant camera body, but it's on and it'll function. There's a few critical differences. This is a smaller focus, smaller lens diameter, so the focus throws are tighter together. Okay, the witness marks are tighter together, and the witness marks are on the top of the camera, on the top of the lens instead of on the side. In a still photographic camera, when you're operating the still camera by yourself, you know, you're shooting and then you want to change something on the lens. I would just tilt the camera like this so I could see the top of the lens. Well, the witness marks for shutter speed and f-stop are all on the top of the camera. So all I had to do was tilt it towards me, make my adjustments, and then go back to shooting, right? But in the cinematic world, because the focus puller is on the side of the camera over here, standing over here, the witness marks on cinema lenses are on the side of the lens. Okay, so using this lens on the cinema camera, I'm not going to be able to see where my focus is hitting because the marks are on top. So I've either got to have a view of the top of the lens, or that's where this white ring on the focus handle makes sense, because what we do is we transfer our marks from the lens barrel to the white dry erase ring on the focus assist. So instead of having to look at the lens barrel now, I'm just looking at the focus assist. So when it's in place and I'm up against the lens, if I'm turning the lens, even if I'm turning the lens, I see my marks now out here instead of trying to look on here. Okay, it's a little bit different way of working. It's also very compact and everything is kind of cramped in on itself, which makes it a little bit of a hassle to try and work this way. So it's not ideal, but let's say just for whatever reason, you were really, really in love with the look you get out of these lenses. And that happens a lot, where you'll get a filmmaker that just loves a vintage lens for whatever reason. And let's say you're going to shoot a film on the Blackmagic Pocket, the original Blackmagic Pocket, right? So this has a micro four thirds lens flange on it, okay, for a micro four thirds lens mount, right? This is a 14mm Panasonic lens right here, right on the at the moment. But let's say I wanted to shoot with what's this? Let's say I wanted to shoot with my Rokinon 35mm cinema lens, right? I want to kind of build this out a little bit into a cinema platform. Well, I can do that. I'll take my Panasonic lens off, my Leica lens, and I'll get a micro four thirds to Canon EF adapter, and I'll pop that puppy right on the camera, effectively changing that micro four thirds flange underneath, this one right here, changing this flange to Canon EF. Now it's Canon EF out here. And because micro four thirds has a difference in flange focal depth, you can see how the adapter is deeper even than the actual lens was, because the amount of projection that this little lens needs is about half of what the Canon EF lens needs. So we need to get the Canon EF lens out further so the projection will cover the sensor properly. And by doing so, it facilitates the use of this adapter. So now I can take this Rokinon 35, which has a native Canon mount on it, which would go directly onto, for instance, it'll go directly onto the Ursa Mini. Okay, if I want to shoot with the Ursa Mini with the Rokinon lenses for size and weight, let's say, well, I can do that pretty easily. I gotta get my flange adapter off there. Just mount the Rokinons directly on. Whoops. And they go right on. Okay. And they got the gears already. So my focus assist is going to go in and mesh right away, which is great. Everything works. Everybody's happy, right? But I want to use it on the little pocket camera. So now that I have my flange adapter on there, I can just go ahead and marry the Rokinon to the pocket cinema camera. And now I have a cinema lens on the pocket cinema camera. And I've got my focus gears, and I got my gears on my f-stop ring. And I can build this out in a cinematic footprint, but use this camera. If I liked the look out of this camera, remember I told you it had a vintage 16mm look? If I wanted to shoot with this camera specifically because of the way the files looked coming out of it, but I wanted to use my Rokinon cinema lenses, I could do that. Just like that. This is just called a lens flange adapter, okay? So there's ways of adapting these tools to whatever camera platform and whatever lens selection we want to go with. Okay, this is a flange adapter. All right. Having said all of that, told you about hard stops. I talked about the gradualness of focus transitions. This little video right here gives you a sense of the transition from foreground to background. If we take a look, it's kind of subtle, but look at, you know, the foreground with this little sort of, I don't know what this is, maybe an aloe vera plant in the foreground. And then we're going to throw the focus to the little cactus in the background and just watch the gradual transition that happens. 1001, 1002, 1003. It's about a 3-second focus throw. Versus a still lens, 1001, 1001. A third of the time. See how short the focus scale is on top of the Canon zoom lens? It's maybe a half an inch of focus turn on the top of that lens. as opposed to the ingenue zoom in the beginning, where they're turning the focus wheel about a half a turn, quite a long way. You can kind of see the numbers happening gradually from 3 feet out to whatever that cactus was at, probably about 6 feet. Okay, so that's the difference demonstrated in between the focus throws of a still lens and a cinema lens. Iris smoothness is the other thing that a cinema lens can give you. Let's say you start a shot at a gas station. The actor's pumping gas. They're under the overhead, so it's not full sun, but it's notably brighter than the actor finishes pumping gas and then they walk into the gas station to pay the attendant. Okay, it's definitely a different exposure inside the gas station, right? But the shot starts outside under the overhead, pumping gas, and then we travel on Steadicam with the actor into the gas station to pay the attendant. There's going to be a change in focus that's going to happen at that point. And with a cinema lens, what you can do, just like I can put the lens on a remote, on a radio controlled focus when we're using Steadicam, I can put the iris on a radio controlled focus as well. So while the actor is walking into the gas station, the focus assistant who is working Steadicam is going to follow the action on the focus and then do what we call rolling the f-stop to get inside the gas station. So let's say the exposure outside the gas station is an 8. Okay, when we go inside the gas station, the exposure is a 2.8. We got to roll the f-stop 3 stops from outside to inside. So the iris has got to open up 3 stops from outside to inside to let more light in when we're inside the gas station, right? Well, with a still photographic lens, most of the time, the f-stops are what we call indented or clicked. Do you hear those clicking noises? Okay. When you go from one f-stop to the next on a still photographic lens, there's a ball bearing inside the f-stop ring that slips into an indent and it makes that clicking sound. That's because if I'm shooting still photographic pictures and I want to change my f-stop from a 4 to a 5.6, I just move it, wait and listen for 1 click, and I've changed it. And I don't have to do this and take my eye away from the viewfinder. So if I'm following a moment in the viewfinder and I don't want to look away because I don't want to miss that moment I'm supposed to hit the shutter button, I can change my f-stop by listening for the clicks and make that adjustment on the lens without having to take my eye away. That's what the clicks are for on a still photographic lens. We don't need the clicks on a motion picture lens because we got a separate person taking care of this problem than the person who is composing the image and lensing the shot. Okay. But what we might want is we might want this smooth transition without any bearing indents. So if we have to roll the f-stop like my example going inside the gas station, I can do that while the camera's rolling. And we can start on a T8 outside. And as we walk into the gas station, I'll just roll that stop open to a 2.8. And you won't even be able to tell. And a lot of times what I'll do is I'll feather it so that the real transition happens in the doorway, right? So the character's walking around the front of the car, walking towards the door. It's still an 8, maybe a little less than an 8 as we get closer to the building. And then right through the walk through the door, that's when I'll flip it to a 2.8. So when we come through the door, right while they're in the door jamb, and the exposure changes drastically and a shadow goes over our subject, whack, I open it fully to a 2.8 and bring them into the room at a 2.8. Okay. But I don't want the lens to jitter or move. I don't want to hear any clicks when it happens. I just want to slide that f-stop open so that the exposure works inside. Okay. So that's a clickless or a seamless f-stop on a cinema lens. Okay. Now, people will say on YouTube videos, oh, you know, these lenses are repurposed photographic lenses that have been declicked. No, they were never clicked in the first place. They were built as a cinema lens, and cinema lenses don't have ball bearing indents in the f-stop ring. It never had them in the first place. So how could it be declicked, right? That's the difference in what we're talking about here. We want you to be accurate and speak with some knowledge about these things, so you don't sound like an idiot on YouTube when you talk about it. Okay. Now, you could take, for instance, I could take my Zeiss lens. Here's a 25mm lens right here. Let's say I really love this and I really want to start using this for shooting video, and I'll probably never really use it much for photographs anymore. I could send this lens away to somebody like Dave Duclos out in Los Angeles, who has Duclos lenses, and they do lens modifications and lens repairs. And I could have him declick this Zeiss lens. At that point, yes, it's a photographic lens that has been repurposed and declicked for cinema use. Okay, that's the difference. This was a still lens, and it was altered to work well with video operation. This lens was never built to be a still photographer's lens. If you want the still version of this lens, Rokinon has a version of it, and it looks different than this. Okay. So let's make sure that we understand that difference, because it's an important distinction. It has a lot to do maybe with the cost of the equipment. It'll have a definite difference on the rental cost of equipment when you go to a place like Borrow Lenses. So they might want a certain amount of money to rent a whole set of Rokinon Cinema Primes, right? Maybe there's 12 lenses in the set and they want $60 per day each. So they want 72 plus tax, say $75 a day to rent the Rokinon Cinema Primes. But they have a set of Zeiss Contax modified, cine-modded, we call it, cine-modded photographic lenses. They'll rent you for $50 a day for the whole set, right? So there could be a cost difference associated with modified lenses versus lenses that are purpose built. Okay. Focus breathing. Okay, here's another difference between still photographic lenses and cinema lenses. Is something we call focus breathing. Is the lens breathing? Is it sucking in oxygen? No, it is not. Okay, but what is happening is when you throw the focus from something close in the foreground to something in the background, let's say, okay, the object in the foreground is going to slowly come out of focus, and the object in the background, which was out of focus, will slowly come into focus. When that happens on a lens that has been, let me choose my words carefully, inexpensively produced, okay, the out of focus blob that becomes the sharp focus of, say, Felix in the background and Bond in the foreground, and the sharp image that was Bond as he slowly goes out of focus on a cheaper lens, the apparent size of Bond's head will change and the apparent size of Felix will change as he goes from an out of focus blob to an in focus image of a man. And then Bond's head goes from an in focus head to an out of focus blob. Okay. And the objects will kind of change size as they go in and out of focus. And when you go back and forth like that in a scene a couple of times, this is where they created the analogy focus breathing, because it looks like the size of the image is changing as you change focus. Here's a little physical demonstration that I got right here of a coffee mug, and we're going to throw the focus to some images in the background. So here's an out of focus blob of, I'm not quite sure what this is. There's I think it's a bottle behind here. And then there's a coffee mug in the foreground. Watch the size of this blob change. It's going to shrink as it becomes more in focus. You see it get smaller as it becomes sharper, and then bigger as it becomes out of focus. Can you see that happening on your screen? That's what we refer to as focus breathing. So pretend The Riot coffee mug is Bond in the foreground. And this thing, whatever it is, this white thing in the background is Felix. Felix would go from a big out of focus blob to an in focus smaller head. And Bond's head, conversely, is shrinking in size in the foreground as it goes out of focus. And it gets bigger in the foreground as it becomes in focus. Closer objects get smaller, further objects get bigger when they come in and out of focus. And this is what we call breathing. And that can be a kind of a distractive aspect of an image, especially on a big cinema screen. And you may or may not be concerned about it. You may or may not worry about the audience being affected by it. It could be a source of anxiety. It could work for you in your story, or it could be just one of those craftsmanship features of your film material that people find for some reason, just, I don't know, it just bothers them, bugs them for some reason. Or they understand that it didn't have to be that way. On a cinema lens, I'm gonna stop this GIF now. On a cinema lens, this lens might be manufactured for a minimal amount of breathing. So while the objective on the front is still 50 millimeter, right, between my two brands, 50 millimeter objectives are still the same front and back. If I wanted to reduce the amount of focus breathing in this lens, I might have to do it by adding more elements of glass inside the physical makeup of this lens, the physical construction of it. Okay, because it has to do with the way light rays are bending as they pass through all these elements of glass. Okay, the inside of your lens is going to have a series of elements in a number of groups. Here is, down here on the bottom of the screen, an example of the Zeiss Biotar element configuration. This configuration was designed by Carl Zeiss in 1927. The Biotar design is still in existence to this day. They improved it, though, when they wanted to improve the amount of, reduce the amount of focus breathing, when they went from Biotar to planar. And I don't know if you saw the front of my lens here, my Zeiss lens, but it says on the front, planar, right? Carl Zeiss planar. So this lens has improved for its focus breathing characteristics. Now, if I wanted to shoot with a vintage lens, like I got these Russian lenses, which are kind of fun to play with. They're called, well, this one's called a Helios. They have different names based on the focal length. But this is a 58 millimeter Helios lens. It's made by a Zeiss lens manufacturing facility that during World War II got captured behind the Iron Curtain and fell under Soviet control. And so it became a Soviet lens by Soviet manufacturers in a repurposed Carl Zeiss plant. And when they did it, they copied the design, the Biotar design. So this lens has the Biotar design in it. Now, some people you might see on YouTube, there's a fad right now where they're buying these Helios lenses and they're putting Cinemods on them. Like this one, the f-stop ring has had the bearing removed so it doesn't click. And the flange on the back here is no longer the universal thread M42 that used to be on here, which was the flange that the Russian Zenit camera required. But this flange right on here, you can't tell because it's black, but this is a Canon EF flange on here that's been added to this lens. So I could put this Helios on my Ursa Mini and shoot with it if I wanted to. And get all the interesting qualities of this lens captured on the video that I shot through the Ursa Mini. I could do that if I wanted to, okay? But it's kind of small. And it's gonna have that focus breathing issue. And it's gonna have World War II era manufacturing characteristics in it that my Zeiss, which was made in, this one was made, I think, in 84 or 82. Okay, like 40 years later. And certainly less than my Rokinon or my Zine for that matter. Okay. And so, you know, the hassles and drawbacks of this lens might be totally mitigated by the look that this lens produces, and that might be the priority, the look of the lens. If the look of the lens isn't the priority, and this is the only one I've got, I can make it work by adapting the flange. Otherwise, when I'm shooting video, I'm gonna want to go with the right tool. So either the full size cinema barrels if I'm doing a lot of focus pulling, or at the very least the geared out and slightly extended rotations of the Rokinon cinema primes. The Rokinons are only 77 in the front though, and the Zines are 114. Interesting thing about that, if you go with the Rokinons with the 77 millimeter fronts, a lot of times, standard matte boxes, which are only about, say, 95 millimeters in accessory size, are just fine with the Rokinons. So this matte box right here, if I wanted the Rokinon to work in it, all I have to do is take this cowling out and screw it right on the front of the Rokinon. And this matte box works just fine with the Rokinon lenses. I'm going to show you more about matte boxes next week when we talk about filters, because that's what these are for, holding filters. So if I had a matte box that was 95 millimeters, I could use my Rokinons because they're 75 and just use a step-up ring, we call it. I can't use my Vocus matte box at 95 millimeters with my Zine cinema primes at 114. So I have to have a matte box that fits 114, which is my Canadian Camvate box. Okay, this will fit the 114, and this is the box I have to use when I use my Zine lenses. I don't like this matte box as much as I like my Vocus matte box, but it's the only one I can use if I'm going to go with the long focus rotation of the Zine lenses. Okay, so a lot of these decisions you're going to make about these pieces of gear now are not only going to be the look and the results you get from the piece of equipment, but it's also going to be the compatibility that piece of gear has with the rest of the kit you're using. Okay, so keep that in mind. The last thing I'm going to talk to you about in terms of cinema lenses is the difference between the diaphragm designations, whether they're f-stops or t-stops. You hear f-stops and t-stops kind of thrown around a lot in the cinematography classes. And it's a very simple concept, okay? An f-stop, or an f number we call it, is the result of a mathematical calculation. Okay, do you see my little diagram on the presentation here? So let's say we have, let's see, this Canon lens, this 60 millimeter is going to be very similar to what's going on the screen here. So inside we got our front objective here, right, which is designated by the capital D. And then we have F, which is showing the measurement, basically the entire length of the barrel. Okay, well, that might be a little bit of a fallacy. Basically, we're looking for the point where rays that come into this lens converge somewhere in the groupings and then project out the back side. The distance from that point to the front of the edge of the front of the objective divided by the diameter of the objective as it appears through the lens, looking through the back. If you take those two measurements and divide one into the other, you get a number that equals or corresponds to the numbers that appear on your f-stop ring on your lenses. Okay, it's just a simple relationship, and it has to do with light going through the lens, through all the groupings, converging and reconverging in X's, right? Going top to bottom, bottom to top, and how they respond when they go through that aperture diaphragm. Okay. Here's a look at the biotar just as a simple graphic. So you got the light rays coming through, okay? An f-stop is just calculating those rough distances, okay? The diameter of the objective by the length of the focal distance of the lens equals your f number. Now, that's a mathematical relationship of two measurements, right? Now, you guys have all taken high school physics by now, right? No? Gabrielle, you didn't take high school physics?
No, sir.
Okay, well, I'm going to help you then. Light rays that travel through two different mediums of two different densities, the rays will disperse and they'll change reflected angle. When they change reflected angle, a portion of the intensity of that beam has been reduced because some of the vector goes straight through the lens because it's glass and it's clear. And some of that light vector gets reflected away from its trajectory through the lens and it gets wasted on the inside walls of the lens. Okay. And we experience that as a dimming of the image. Okay. It's very minute, right? But it exists, and it exists in lenses. And the more elements you have in your lens, the more that effect is going to be present in what's going on. All right. So a cinema lens with, let's say it's a lens with a really big objective on it, like this 14. Okay, here's a Zine 14. Look at the size of that front objective. You see how it's kind of convex and bulbous? And this thing is thick, right? And that's just the front objective. And this is a 14. So there might be another 8 or 9 elements in here bending the light rays to make this thing have a wide field of view, 14 millimeter. All right. Now imagine the stack of glass that's inside this lens barrel. And imagine a ray of light trying to get through all of that glass to get through to the sensor on the inside. A certain portion of that light intensity is going to be lost as it travels between those pieces of glass that are stacked up in here. Okay. So where an f-stop is only comparing physical distances, flange focal distance versus objective diameter, the t-stop says, okay, we're going to take all of that and then we're going to divide it by the square root of the amount of light that's being lost as it passes through this lens. And that can be measured. You could measure that with a light meter. So let's say light coming through, going through this side doesn't really matter. Coming out this side, it's a 2.8, right? Or coming out of, coming out of my 14 millimeter pancake lens, it's 2.8 going in and 2.8 coming out. There's no light loss in here because there's like maybe 3 or 4 elements inside consisting of this lens. So the f-stop is pretty accurate for this lens. But for this 14 millimeter, it's bigger. It's got a wider rotation. So it's a bigger objective in the front. It's thicker, right? Notably thicker. And there's a number of them in there, okay? Where there might have been, say there's 4 in here. Well, there might be 4 in here also, but they're way bigger than the 4 in the little Panasonic lens. So the light might be 2.8 going through the front, but it's only a 2 coming out the back, right? Or maybe it's not, yeah, a 2 coming out the back. All right, we lost almost a full stop of light. We lost, say 50%. Okay, usually that's a lot. You won't lose quite that much, but you might lose 25%. So if you lose 25% of the light going through the lens, that has to be accounted for on the cinema lens, right? Because if you set the cinema lens to f2 or t2, they're not going to have the same apparent brightness. Okay, the t-stop is the focal distance divided by the square root of the transmittance. In other words, if an f2 lens with a transmittance of only 75%, when you do the math, that means the t-stop is t2.3, not t2, right? So the exposure calculation will be different for the cinema lens. The other thing that you might want to know is, let's say you're shooting a dialogue scene between 2 people talking in, Ethan and Julie, right? Talking at the cafe. You want to use the 14 for the 2 shot of them sitting at the table. And you've done all of your lighting and the gaffer has tweaked everything so that all the lighting at the table towards camera equals a 2.8, right? So you set your 14 mil at a 2.8. Now you want to go in for a close-up of Ethan, and then you want to turn around and get a close-up of Julie. But you want to do that with a 50mm lens, okay? The 50mm lens has a different construction than the 14. It's got different size elements and different groupings and different number of elements. The f-stop value of the 50mm lens and the f-stop value of the 14mm lens are not congruent. They're not equal. But if you've done the t-stop calibration on the 50 and the t-stop calibration on the 14, and you pick 2.8, T 2.8 on the 14, and then you go in for close-ups on Ethan and close-ups on Julie, you set the 50mm lens to T 2.8, and the transmittance will be the same between the two lenses, okay? Because it's already been calculated out to include the density of the glass. And this is really, really important when you're shooting a movie, okay? You'll see this on a monitor. If you have like a 19-inch or a 26-inch director's monitor on set, and you're shooting with photographic primes instead of cinema lenses, when you go from a wide angle to a telephoto lens for your coverage, and you look at the image on the monitor with the wide angle, and then you switch to the telephoto lens and you walk over and you go, whoa, 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 that's way darker than the other lens. What's going on? We got to open that lens. Okay, that's fine. You can do that. So let's say you were shooting at a f3.5 on the wide angle lens, but you walk over and you look at the telephoto and you got to open that to an f2 on the telephoto. The brightness is now equal and you're like, okay, phew, that's great, okay? But the depth of field between the two lenses changed because we changed the f-stop. I'm going to talk to you about depth of field more after the midterm. The amount of focus or the apparent zone of focus around your subject will change dramatically at different f-stops. You've thrown the photometrics of your image off by changing the f-stop to accommodate the lens brightness because you're working with f-stop lenses instead of t-stop lenses. A lot of times it doesn't really make a whole lot of difference. And then sometimes it does, okay? In sets where you're using really low light and you're dealing with wide f-stops to begin with, it might not be such a bad thing. But maybe you're in a set where you've got an average amount of values, and in some areas of the set it's brighter than others, and then it might make a lot of difference. Okay, and then you've got to constantly be recalculating and readjusting for the differences in your lens stock. Okay, a matched set of cinema primes will all be set with t-stop values, and the t-stop values will be the same from lens to lens. So T4 on a wide angle lens is the same as T4 on a telephoto lens with cinema lenses. And to do that, it takes different construction, which tends to be a little bit more expensive, which is why you can buy a Canon Nifty 50 for say $100 off Amazon, but say the Rokinon 50mm is going to cost you $400. Okay, part of that difference is the cinema aspects of the construction of the lens. Okay, so if you can work with cinema glass as a filmmaker, it'll make your life a little bit easier. There'll be less compromising and less adapting and modifying that has to take place. I always had a lot of lenses in my possession, okay? And so when I started shooting digital video about 20 years ago, I'm like, I'll just use my still lenses. They're all great lenses. They work really, really well. I love them. I've had them my whole life. And it was okay for a while. And there were workarounds and there were gadgets and gizmos to make them work better on the video cameras. And some of the solutions were more expensive than others. You know, I remember going through lens adapters and cine tubes and all kinds of stuff to get, you know, the still lenses to work on the Varicam digital video camera, for instance. And it started to become a big hassle after a while, because when you're on a set working for clients, you know, and you're shooting for them, and let's say, so I started doing a lot of commercials as a cinematographer. They don't want to wait around for me to modify and screw with a photographic lens because they, they might have a number of shots they want to get accomplished in the day. And the more screwing around I have to do modifying the equipment, the less actual shooting I'm getting done. And so at that point, you have to start asking yourself questions. Would it be cost effective for me to, say, invest in a whole set of cinema primes like the Rokinons? So at least I have my gears built in. I don't have separate gears to fiddle with. My lenses are all set in T-stops. They're all bearingless f-stops, so they don't make noises and click when I adjust them. They got longer focus throws than the still photographic lenses. Does it make sense to spend the few $1,000s it'll take me to access or own these lenses to keep my clients happy? And so there's less that I have to think about and worry about as well on set, and I can focus on what they want and their needs and making them happy by not having to compromise with the gear. And that was a question I had to ask myself later on. So now I'm at the point where it's like, if I'm shooting digital video, I want digital video lenses. I don't want to modify anything. I don't want to mess around with it, because then it's less that I have to worry about. And if it's a really important client or a really complex shoot, the last thing I want to be doing is focusing my attention in the wrong place. Say I'm shooting a car commercial, I'm looking for the right time of day and I'm looking for the right reflections in the hood and in the windshield. I want to be looking at that stuff. I don't want to be looking at whether or not my focus gears fit my Canon photo zoom lens on my digital cinema camera or not, and whether or not it's f-stops or t-stops. So you go and you invest in cinema zooms and you get rid of your Canon zooms, which is exactly what I did. Right. So there's a time and a place for these things. If you don't have the cash, or if your budgets don't allow you to rent or buy the cinema stuff, you work with the still stuff in the beginning and you transition when it's convenient. Okay. Here's a little video by Matt Granger. I put it in web courses for you. It's T-stops versus f-stops from Matt's point of view. And you can watch that at your leisure. Check it out. It's up there for you. And there's a couple of other videos up there for you on follow focus and focus pulling. So you can, kind of study up on those concepts a little bit more. But I'm going to move forward and just talk really briefly about lens connectivity, how the lens attaches to the camera. We kind of been talking about it all along, but a lot of these lenses are going to have different connectivity. In other words, different flanges, Zeiss contacts, Panasonic Lumix, micro four thirds. So we got micro four thirds on the cinema zooms that go on the pocket cinema camera or the GH5. Okay, so the GH5 has a different lens flange than the Canon 60D. The Canon 60D and the Ursa Mini have the same lens flange because that's how UCF bought these cameras. But these cameras could have come with the Canon EF flange. They could have came with the PL flange. And I think they also came at one point with a Nikon option as well. And then if you wanted anything else, you had to use adapters going from something to something else. Okay. It just so happens that it's easier to adapt Canon EF lens flanges, like the ones on my Rokinons, for instance, to virtually any other lens flange, because the specs for the EF lens are bigger and encompass more measurements than other lens flanges. So other cameras with other lens flanges can adapt to the EF lenses very easily, as opposed to EF lenses, which only go on EF mounts. It's really hard to get them to go the other way, but you can. In this case, I have one that goes EF to micro four thirds, because the micro four thirds sensor is smaller than the EF sensor and requires less focal distance. So it's possible to do with this adapter. Okay, but you can't always adapt one thing to the other. But if you go with Canon EF, that adapts very, very well with a lot of different cameras and native lens flanges. Just keep that in mind. They look a little bit different. For instance, here's on the left, here's the Canon EF flange. Here's a Nikon flange with autofocus and all the electronic contacts. So if you're using like that new Nikon, what is it, the R5, I think, it's going to have a different native lens flange than your Canon EOS camera. And the two they're not cross compatible. You have to get specifically the Canon flange or the Nikon flange. And I don't think these two are cross compatible with adapters. I don't think. The other kind of flange adapter you might run into is called a PL mount. And the PL just stands for positive lock, and it was developed by Panavision. So we used to call it the Panavision locking flange, right? And it was 4 little metal barbs or bayonets. You can see them on the outside diameter here. And basically it involved a ring on the camera itself. Instead of a mirror opposite bayonet flange, there was actually a receiver and a locking ring. So you would just take the PL lens and just seat it right on the front of the camera and then turn the locking ring on the camera, and that would fasten the lens to the front of the film camera. When they started making digital cinema cameras, there were a lot of guys from the film generation who maybe they had a set of cinema lenses already that were designed to work on Arri or Panaflex cameras, and they had PL mounts on them. So a lot of the digital cinema cameras that came out initially had PL mounts on them so that legacy lenses could be used on the new cameras, because a lens that works really well and has pleasing color, contrast, and sharpness is a value in any technological era, because the thing that changes isn't necessarily the lenses, but the cameras themselves. So as long as they fit, you can save a lot of money by using your old lenses on the new digital cinema cameras. So they were putting PL mounts on the cameras, and the mistake was everybody made the assumption that PL meant it was better, for instance, than Canon EF. And that's not the case. It was simply an issue of convenience. PL, lenses with PL flanges on them don't necessarily mean they're better. There are some new lenses out that are being manufactured in this day and age with Canon EF native flanges on them that are better and perform better than PL mount lenses that were made, say, in the 60s or 70s. Because our understanding of technology and manufacturing of lenses has gotten better in the last 60 years. So a lens made 60 years ago with a PL flange on it versus a lens made last year with an EF flange on it might get its butt kicked by the new lens, because the old lens the glass was made in the old way, not as sharp, different kind of contrast, different kind of color rendition. Sometimes you like that, sometimes you don't. If you like it, great. Just make sure you get a digital cinema camera with a PL mount on it. But if you want sharpness and you want digital sharpness for 8K, for instance, and you want really good color saturation because you have a camera that records a profile that is 12-bit color science and color depth, and you're shooting high resolution, you might want those newer lenses, and then you're going to be looking at getting probably EF mount. So, there's a time and a place for the different lens flanges, okay? But one is not necessarily better than the other. It's just relevant to the brand and the connectivity. That's it. Okay, so for your assignment, what I'm going to ask you to do is create a little document for me. You can make it a Word doc, and I want you to check out, I gave you a PDF. It's called The Art of Storyboarding, but it talks about lens point of view and framing and composition that we use cinematically when we're making storyboards, and then when we're gathering the content, when we're shooting it on set during production. So it's a good little PDF for you to read. It's a precursor to a conversation we're going to have in a few weeks about camera coverage and composition and framing. But for this assignment, I want you to just read the PDF, look at the criteria for a wide shot, a medium shot, and a close-up, and an insert, and manufacture 4 shots of your own that use those characteristics or that criteria. And they can be still images. And then I want you to shoot 1 video image and show me a focus throw. and do it 3 different ways. Okay. And all of that's in the instructions for the assignment. Shoot the video, upload it to YouTube, and then take the link that leads to your video and put it on your Word doc next to your other images. Okay. And just organize it neatly so I understand what I'm looking at. Put your name on the document. Okay. And turn that in, and you're going to have like 2 weeks to do it. Okay. Check out the PDF, check out the assignment instructions. If you have any questions, shoot me an email and I'll be happy to address it for you. Okay. So here's where we're at. So you're going to read in the Camera Assistance Manual, Chapter 4 on focus measurement and following focus, and then the PDF, Anatomy of a Storyboard. Okay. Check these videos out on web courses. The Art of Pulling Focus, Focus Pulling, rack focus, and then there's one on T-stops versus f-stops. And between this lecture, those videos, and the PDF and the reading assignment, which isn't very much, you should have no problem fulfilling that assignment, that shooting assignment. Okay. I recommend going and renting this guy. You won't have to worry about lenses because it's got a lens built in, but it's got a nice big wheel and it has like these presets. So you can set it to zoom automatically by touching the button, or you can go to manual focus and use this as a focus aid to resolve your image. That's how you're going to get your focus throws, right? By switching it to focus mode and going manually and doing your focus throws this way. They'll send you out with this camera with a little lens hood for the front and a tripod, a little tripod, a battery, and an SD card. So you should have everything you need to do the assignment. And I would check these out and go borrow one from UCF, do your assignment with it. The menu system in this camera is the same as the menu system in a GH5. So if you know how to use this, you'll be able to use a GH5. It's also similar to the kind of menu system that you would use in a Sony and also in a Z camera. Okay. It's not as simple as the Blackmagic stuff. That's really nice user interface on Blackmagic, but it's not hard to figure out. I've also given you a PDF for the camera manual for this camera. The checkout room will show you how to use it. They'll give you a quick rundown on how to operate it. And then if you have further questions, I gave you the operator's manual on web courses for this camera. Okay. So you should have everything that you need to go out and do that quick little assignment. And quite honestly, the assignment shouldn't take you more than a couple of hours, right? So pick your day strategically so that there's plenty of cameras for you to get when you go to school. Do your assignment, and then please return the camera as soon as you can so that somebody else can then take it out and shoot their assignment with it as well. Okay. So that's it. Anybody have any questions for me about all of this blather? Anything at all?
There was a question in chat.
Yeah, what do we got?
It says, do we have to use a person in each shot?
I get this question a lot. What would you use as opposed to a person?
No, I'm not sure. Someone else asked the question.
I've had people try to use their dog. I've had people use stuffed animals on their bed. It's not ideal, right? Number one, movies aren't about stuffed animals, and only sometimes are they about dogs, but they're almost always about people. Okay. So your subject should be people. Also, even the material you generate for this shooting assignment, if you do a nice job, could possibly end up on your visual portfolio, on your reel. So if you compromise now with this assignment, the material is definitely not going to be good for anything else but this assignment, as opposed to taking your girlfriend or your significant other out on a nice day in the park, do some very nice shots, and they might be useful for other things, namely your portfolio. Okay. That's another reason. The third reason is you have to start getting into the habit of soliciting help for your assignments. You can't do this solo forever. Sooner or later, you're going to have to work with people. You're going to have to approach them. You're going to have to solicit their help. You're going to have to hire them or promise them compensation or buy them lunch or buy them a cup of coffee or just pay them back with the same kind of cooperation when it's their time to do their project and you be their subject for them. But you got to get used to the transactional requirements of being in the film industry. There's no better time than now to break your phobia of talking to strangers or approaching people and asking for help or whatever the issue is. Okay. You work on a big movie, you're going to be working with dozens, if not hundreds of people. Okay. You are never going to work in this industry alone unless you're a documentarian with a very obscure subject matter like rock climbing. Okay. If you're the guy that shot Free Climb, yeah, he was working alone. You know why? He was hanging 3,000 feet off the front of a rock in Yosemite, and not a lot of people wanted to follow him on that project. They're like, yeah, no, you're on your own, pal. And he shot it alone. Well, actually, there was 2 cameras. So technically, but each of those people were working alone. Other than that, right, you're going to be working with a crew. You're going to have to hire them. They're going to hire you. Get used to it. Okay. It's good process. That's all. But mostly, if you do a really good job, they could end up in your portfolio. And that's the other thing about film school that I don't know if you realize it. And the sooner you do, the more content you'll be able to throw at this problem. When you leave here, how are you going to prove to a client that wants to hire you that you can do what you say you know how to do? If you don't have footage that you can show them, they're not going to hire you because they're not going to believe you. And what are you going to show them? A reel full of dogs and stuffed animals? And they're going to go, yeah, and you want us to pay you how much to shoot a car commercial? Yeah, no. I want to see somebody with a reel that's got cars on it. You know, I want to see, you know, models. I want to see production value. And you've got Spot and your My Little Pony dolls on your portfolio, on your reel. It's not going to impress any clients when you get out of school. Okay. So you might as well start, you know, putting some effort into this now and think about it in those terms. Whatever you shoot now, you should be perfectly fine with showing a prospective client. Okay. And if you can treat all your assignments that way, whether it's this class or any other, the better off you're going to be. Because if you graduate after 4 years of being here and doing all the work that you're doing and you don't have anything to show for it, you're going to start at the bottom, working your way up, earning trust the hard way. Instead of just being able to say, here's my reel, hand them a DVD, check out what I shot. Let me know if you want me to shoot your car commercial or your booze commercial or your whatever commercial, right? So that's why I would say, yeah, if you can get people, because it always makes a better impression. Now, having said that, I know there's going to be somebody that's going to come up with some object that is super cool and they want to shoot it. And then we're going to have to reevaluate that whole thing, right? If you know, I mean, I've done beer shots for commercials, right? And that's a thing. It's not a person. So if you can make a can or a frosty glass of Guinness look so enticing, you would drink it if you could just pull it off the TV screen. That takes a certain amount of skill and work too, and it's not a person, but it's still attacking the problem with a professional mindset. Do you understand the difference? So just attack the problem with your best professional solution. And if it happens to, look, man, I gaffed 3rd unit of Underdog, and most of the time it was a stuffed dog. Okay. So I actually have lit the stuffed animal for real. Okay. But that's so rare. Okay. So like I'm saying, there's an exception to everything that I say. Okay. There always will be. But for the most part, get somebody to help you. You'll be happy that you did in the long run. You'll be happier. Okay. Here's a suggestion. 2 of you work together, right? One person's your subject and you shoot them for everything you got to do, and then flip and you be their subject or their shooter and vice versa. You both will turn in an assignment, but you've also both been each other's help. Okay. That might solve the problem, and it's fewer cameras they have to rent over at UCF, right? Because there's like 126 of you guys that I'm responsible for. And they've only got 30 cameras. So it's first come, first serve. So you can nip that in the bud by teaming up. Okay. So I'm all for that if you want to do that too. Okay. Is that clear as mud? Anybody have any questions about that? You good with it? Cool. All right, folks, if you got any questions or problems, let me know. The other thing I wanted to mention to you is, I think, what is this? So this is week 6, week 7. I think I'm going to do some review with you guys next week. Let me look at the module real quick.
I had a question super quick, if you could take this.
Yeah, go ahead.
What would be a good time frame to check out the equipment? Like how long do you think we should have it for?
I think you can do the whole thing in a day, but what you might want to do is plan 3 days, like a day to go over to campus and get it, and then a day to shoot it, and then return the gear on the next day. 3 days, does that sound reasonable? 4 at the outside if you need a couple of days to, 1 day to
That's
shoot
perfect.
stills, 1 day to shoot video. Right?
That's good. I was just wondering. I didn't know how long is too long or what.
I mean, they'll let you take it for as long as you need it because it's first come, first serve over there. That's why I'm saying get in there early and get what you need and then get it back as soon as you can. If all the cameras are gone by the time you get there, you're going to have to use the next best available camera, which will make that camera the perfect camera for your project because it'll be the one you can use the day you're ready to shoot. And that might very well end up being your cell phone. Just bear in mind that you can't do focus throws on your cell phone. Okay. At least I don't think you can. Now there's software I know for the iPhones. And when I had a Samsung Galaxy Note a few years back, and I was able to find some manual software controls for that phone. But I don't think any of that had focus control. I don't remember now. There might be an app now with the newest Apple phones that will allow you to manually focus the cell phone, but I wouldn't stake my life on it. Okay. So if you can't achieve manual focus on your phone, you might want to pick another device. Or you can shoot the still images on your phone, right? The wide, the medium, the close up, and the insert, you can do that on the cell phone while you're waiting for a camera to become available if you end up on a waiting list, and then just use the Panasonic to do your focus throw part of the assignment. Okay.
I would just like to say if anybody in here wants to contact me to do this project, I'm more than willing to. Just want to put that out there.
There you go. In fact, put an announcement on the community announcement board in the startup section of this class, and just ask for some help or offer your assistance. Start networking with each other, guys. You'll rise and fall and succeed together, right? You'll start becoming a group. That's really, really important.
Yeah, I'll definitely post it on there, and then I use a Canon 80D currently, so I mean we can use that together. Perfect. Or if you want to rent out a camera and have 2 cameras, we can do that too.
There you go. Canon 80D. That's totally fine. That's 2 generations newer than my little 60s that are trudging around here somewhere. I don't know what I did with them. But yeah. Anybody else got their own camera? You got Colin's got his own. Jack, what do you got?
I got a Nikon D3500 right now.
D3500.
Or D3400, yeah.
Is that like a point and shoot style?
Sorry, what?
Is that like a point and shoot style, or is it an SLR style?
It's an SLR. It's a DSLR.
Shoots HD video?
Yeah, definitely.
That's all you need, man.
Yep.
1080p or 720?
I'm sorry?
1080 or 720p?
1080.
Sweet. You're set. You're good to go.
Awesome.
Yeah. Anybody else got a camera? Jazz, you have a camera? No?
Wait, me? My wife has a camera, like a Canon EOS, like DSLR, I think, but I gotta dig it out. So
Shoot video?
yeah, it does video.
Sweet. Gabby, you got a camera?
Yeah, I have a Sony A6500.
Nice. That's full frame, right?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I haven't used it in like a year since high school.
I think that's full frame. That should be really, really nice and low light. And that's a good little camera, the 6500. What do you got, Zach?
I got a Canon EOS RP.
RP, is that the new one?
Yeah, it's one of the latest ones, yeah.
And that's got the new wider lens flange on it, right? And then you have to adapt it to the old Canon series.
Yeah, and it can shoot in 4K too.
Nice. Show off. Cool. That's great. That's terrific, guys. That's really great. So yeah, feel free to use your own camera. You know, I could give you more shooting assignments if I knew that you guys all had your own cameras. It's the only reason I don't is because I worry about how you're going to get to campus and access the operations center, and and then I worry about all the people that might put a run on the little bit of availability we have. But if you got your own cameras, that's a really good sign. That means you're already thinking about this stuff. So I'm super psyched about that. That's great.
I had a question real quick, if that was okay.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I'm doing this correctly. I've attended every live session and I noticed there's like a roll call attendance portion in the grades. But my grade is currently like reflecting as like a 12%. So
I haven't adjusted the attendance grade yet.
okay. I was wondering.
Every time you come to this lecture, you're good to go on attendance. If you miss a lecture live, it's not a big deal if you watch the recorded session. But if you don't do that either, if you miss both things, I think it's worth like 6 points.
Okay, I think I've only had to watch a recording once, but even if I am at the live, I've been like writing in the text box, right? We write complete and then
if
say
you're
something
live, what I discovered about Zoom in like week 2 or 3 was that I can generate an attendance file from Zoom, and it tells me who came and how long you stayed. So like I've had a couple of smarty pantses try to tell me they were at the live session. Then I look at my Zoom attendance Excel spreadsheet and it says they were there for like 5 minutes. And I'm like, no, you don't get credit for 5 minutes on an hour and a half lecture. So I download that report after every lecture now, and I check off whoever was at the session. And if you've been there for at least, 3/4 of it or 2/3 of it, or if I know that you're usually there, I give you full credit for the lecture. Okay, what I'm going to do is while you guys do your midterm that week, which is week 8, I'm going to bring everybody's attendance level up to snuff based on your lecture attendance. And then you should have an idea of where you stand between then and the rest of the semester.
Okay.
So don't worry about whatever that grade says right now. It's not accurate.
Okay, cool. That's all.
Okay. Anybody else? Anyone? Anything? News, gossip, anything? All right. Shall we adjourn then? Yeah.
Sounds good to me. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for your time and attention. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to your assignments. Have a good afternoon.